Hello, movie nerds, and welcome back to Cinematic Sarcastic, a podcast that talks all things movies and television. I'm Natalie, and I'm your host. On today's episode, I thought we would talk about Outer Range. Now, season 2 has just dropped. I have not jumped into season 2 yet. I'm about to, but I thought we would talk about season 1, kind of do a recap, review, discussion before I did a review of kind of my thoughts around season 2, where I think the show is headed and all of that kind of good stuff. So if you have not watched season 1 of Outer Range yet, I would do that before listening to this episode because there are going to be some pretty heavy spoilers in this episode as far as things that happen in season 1. So Outer Range, for anyone who is not familiar with this television show, is kind of like this sci-fi, like Yellowstone adjacent kind of television series starring Josh Brolin, Will Patton. Noah Reid is also in this, for anyone who will more likely recognize him from Schitt's Creek. But this show has to be one of those shows that I feel like, despite how many episodes we get, I still always have really very little clue as to what's going on. But for anyone who is not familiar with it, basically Josh Brolin and Will Patton kind of are two families that just have some beef, and they both own properties. So they both own ranches, and Will Patton's character of Wayne is constantly trying to sort of buy out or in some way take possession of Royal Abbott's land and kind of get it for himself. And the reason for that is because on Royal's land, there is this mysterious hole. Now, we never really get to find out what the origins of this hole are, but throughout the entire show, we do see that anyone who goes into it or anything that goes into it is sort of teleported, if you will, to another time. So Josh Brolin's character of Royal, for instance, was living in a different time. He stepped into the hole, was kind of like running, and figured that was his way out, and ended up catapulting himself sort of forward in time, and was adopted by the Abbott family, which is how he kind of came to own this property. It was property that he had lived on before or had been around before, but didn't own it. He was just a kid at the time that he first encountered this mysterious hole. Now, we do know that his granddaughter also has ended up in the hole or has somehow gone missing. She is aware of what's going on. There's just a whole bunch of kerfuffle happening in this show all at once. There's a police officer because of a murder sort of investigation that's happening. The police officer ends up going into the hole and going backwards in time. There are buffalo that go back and forth. There are all of these rumors of different sort of prehistoric creatures coming into our current time. But really, none of the stuff that's going on in this show is ever really explained. Like, it never tells you sort of what the significance of this hole is, why it opens and closes at particular times, you know, what the purpose of it is. There is also this sort of strange happening that occurs when an entire mountain range kind of disappears. And I don't know if that is to do with sort of like the prehistoric, if there is some sort of prehistoric creature that is coming one way or the other, if that's when the mountain kind of disappears or when people can see that go away. Because obviously that mountain would not have been there during prehistoric times. So I don't know if like the two time lines are converging in some sort of way that will make changes to our current time or not. It just seems very strange to me, especially given kind of how out in the open it is. It's not like this small hole that you wouldn't necessarily be able to stumble upon unless you were looking for it. Like, it's a pretty good size. You could drive a car, you know, straight into this hole. It's really good size. An entire herd of buffalo at the end of season 1, I think goes straight through it. So it does sort of beg the question as to why it's a mystery, or why it's not more well known, or why this is not more public knowledge. It does sort of have a little bit of a flash forward to some scientific research that appears to be happening around this mysterious hole, but they never really do kind of go that much into that sort of aspect of the story. I am assuming, or at least hoping, that we will get a little bit more of that in season 2. But I get very confused with kind of who's been in the hole, who hasn't been in the hole, where each person comes from in terms of the timeline. Did Royal's son's wife, so Perry, his wife is missing throughout the entirety of the show, and nobody knows what happened to her. So did she go into the hole? She does make an appearance later and takes her daughter. And then, of course, we don't see her daughter again until her daughter is grown up. So surely there must be some sort of connection there between, like, maybe the daughter going into the hole with her mother and then coming back sometime later. Do some people know how to navigate the time difference? It's sort of, in some ways, very much kind of reminds me of the new show Dark Matter, where he's able to kind of find, I guess they're not very similar because the same people exist, in both times in Dark Matter. It's just you're on a different sort of multiverse, if you will. Whereas in Outer Range, it definitely seems like time is more of a linear sort of construct, and you're just going back and forth between that. But it doesn't ever really kind of show you like how certain people end up back where they are, or it never goes into much detail in terms of what the hole is, what its purpose is, why, some people go to a different time frame and don't seem to ever come back, why certain people seem to just disappear for a couple of days and then are found, again somewhere else, or can come back into our current time. So I'm really hoping in season 2 we get a lot more explanation as to kind of what this hole is, what it does, what the purpose of it is, how this family in particular is connected to it, because it really does seem to sort of center around the Abbott family specifically and just things that are happening to them specifically. Like, it doesn't really seem like too many other people know about it or are aware of it. And I do understand, obviously this whole being on the Abbott family land. So, of course, if they've always kept possession of that land, but I do sort of have to question, like, since the buffalo are able to come back and forth from a time when, the indigenous peoples are there and sort of thriving on the same land, why it is that we haven't seen like the indigenous peoples coming back and forth through time, or that they don't seem particularly adventurous, I guess, or they don't seem to really utilize it in the same way that like Royal and his family seems to utilize it, or there's not as much back and forth between like people of a past era, I guess, coming forward. It seems more so like people from future eras kind of going backwards or forwards. It doesn't necessarily seem like there is any justification to any of that. So I am hoping in season 2 we'll see kind of more of those questions being answered, because I feel like season 1 was a lot of things that are left up in the air. You having the ability to just choose and guess what you want to have happened. I do want to see more of the story kind of fleshed out between Wayne Tillerson, played by Will Patton, and like his family of sons, and like why the two families have this rivalry and hatred of each other, or more so like have that kind of resolve. Because it just seems like there are so many questions and so many storylines going that it can get quite confusing just because of the nature of the show and it being something that isn't necessarily explainable. It is more like paranormal sci-fi-ish. So I am hoping we'll see some of those left open storylines kind of closing out. I really want to know what the deal is with like Royal's wife and the bears, and like why she keeps finding dead bears or making dead bears. Like there just seems to be this strange connection with animals and people. I would love to know more about that kind of thing. But really, I'm hoping to go into season 2 and get a lot more answers out of season 2, as opposed to just having season 2 be just as kind of convoluted and leave me with more questions, because I do find the television show interesting, but I do think like if there aren't more answers that kind of come out of it or some more explanations giving, I do see Outer Range kind of becoming less interesting over time and just something that I kind of tune out from watching because I don't really necessarily understand what's going on, and you know, that story isn't progressing in a way that is all that interesting. So I don't know. Those are really kind of my sort of thoughts around Outer Range. What do you guys think is going to happen in season 2? Leave me some comments as to what you think your predictions are for kind of what we're going to see, or if you've already binge watched it. Try not to ruin it for anybody else, obviously, like don't post spoilers or anything like that, but do let me know kind of what your guesses are for it. You can always leave me comments on YouTube if you want to have like more of a discussion around Outer Range. I would love that. You can find me on Threads and on Instagram under Cinematic Sarcastic. Subscribe if you want to join the Movie Nerd family, and I hope to see you in the next episode.